Agriculture Department says the source of the outbreak is yet to be identified, but an investigation is underway. Let's get some reaction now from the sector. CEO of the South African Pork Producers Organisation, Johan Kotzé, joins me now in studio. Johan, thank you so much for your time. It's worrying that Dr. Mphomaja was saying there that area where we see the occurrence of African swine fever has increased. What are we seeing in terms of the trends of recurrence of swine fever in South Africa?
I think the first thing we need to have a kind of understanding is urbanization plays a major role in the spread of diseases. Because all of a sudden you have people moving, taking food with them, and maybe raw meat. And that's one of the main sources of all over South Africa where African swine fever just occurred. So it's a great concern for us. It's a great concern for government that the occurrence is all over South Africa, because it means that we battle to maintain the disease. And I think that's the main thing for us, is to maintain the disease and make sure you kind of suppress the whole thing.
And so it's absolutely understandable that this preliminary quarantine has been put in place. And it kind of reminds me of COVID-19, when we had those sort of track and trace, and you had to sort of, isolate even if you weren't sure whether you had come into contact with someone. And so those processes are very much to protect the whole industry. But we also have to look at the knock-on financial implications. Are there likely to be, even though this is quite limited to a couple of farms, is there likely to be a financial impact for farmers in the pork industry?
Yeah, for sure. I think firstly for the farmer where it broke, and normally that's where you kind of maintain it. So a big loss. You literally lose the whole herd. So if you have a 800 sow unit is what we have here, you talk about 8,000 standing pigs. So it's a great loss. Industry-wise, I think if we can't maintain it and it goes to a greater level, where you talk about the national herd, then we really talk about a loss. But in our terms, any pig that's lost through this ASF outbreak or a outbreak is a great loss to us. I think what I need to emphasize is it's not a loss to such an extent that it would have such an impact that the greater of South Africa is going to now pay more for pork.
Okay, we're not going to see a pork shortage on the supermarket shelves.
No, but I think what we've learned out of COVID and what we also experience is the disturbance that it brings. So all of a sudden there's a logistic disturbance, logistically through the abattoirs. We can't slaughter everywhere. And I think that is just the norm, and we need to reshuffle ourselves. So I think minimal in the greater picture. What a loss for the farmers and the community around the farmers. So it's a battle we need to conquer.
Often when we quantify this kind of an impact, we look at the formal sector, the commercial sector, but we also have to look at the impact of the informal selling meat sector, but also emerging farmers. And I know when we had the foot and mouth outbreak last year, we saw emerging small-scale farmers in far-flung communities affected the worst because they simply didn't have the infrastructure to still slaughter within those red zones. What are we looking at with development of infrastructure, abattoirs, for emerging farmers in the pork sector?
I think the first thing to secure ASF is the way you farm, the methodology, and that goes with infrastructure. So the more biosecure you are, the greater your possibility of fighting the disease. And the small-scale people are battling to kind of biosecure themselves, purely because of the lack of infrastructure. So a difficult one to do. The barrier to entry to get into the commercial space is quite high. To give you an indication, to build a house for a sow, it's going to cost you between 100 to 120,000 rand per sow. 1,000 sow unit is 120 million. So such a great barrier to entry due to the methodology that we use. The abattoirs itself, I think we have great abattoirs in South Africa, which serves the purpose from the large scale up to the small scale. So abattoir-wise, I think we're well served with that. The red zone district area which Dr. Maja referred to, there's also some stunning abattoirs there. So I think it's more ASF-wise, it's more biosecurity on the farm level, of which infrastructure is the greatest need for the small-scale people.
Still staying on the topic of infrastructure, but moving a little bit to a different problem. We know the whole agricultural sector has been up in arms. like many South Africans right through the board, have been about load shedding, because we know the impact of load shedding on irrigation farmers, dairy farmers, any farmer who is expanded into agro-processing. They simply cannot function without power. And generators, we know, are not sufficient to pump irrigation, for instance. So what's the impact of load shedding specifically on the pork sector, and how are farmers and producers and SAPO mitigating those risks?
First thing is, I think we need to have a look at our whole value chain. So if we have a disruption, we're small. If we have a disruption in our value chain, it pushes back up to the farmer. So I think farm-wise, we're in good standing with alternative energy. I think if you do, for our large farmers, if they do a system that's completely enclosed, there's always alternative energy in the plan when you submit and when we farm like that. The smaller guys are also coping because of the ventilation we have that is not due to, dependent on electricity. The difficulty for us is the disruption at the abattoirs and the processing plant. So the moment that you have a shortage of electricity, as what we have now, you need to double shift yourself. And we work with living animals. So the moment you do that, you bring in a large disruption into the sector. I think if I need to look into our industry, what the impact is going to be, I think we'll survive the impact, and there's a lot of new initiatives that's coming out of this crisis that we deal with. However, the cost implication is normally the big one. So our production cost is just going up, and it goes right through the value chain up to the retail side. So, and that's where we don't want to be, because I think we're living in a cash-strapped time, and where people are under immense pressure financially.
Well, luckily, we have some of the most resilient and innovative farmers and producers in the world. Thank you very much for your time. South African Pork Producers Organisation CEO Johan Kotzé talking to us there.